The idea would be is that we're going to invite sort of people within the cyber or information security industry to come and talk about various topics. JJ's a guy I've known for a little while. In fact, we've done a webinar previously, so it sort of made sense to kick things off with him. He mentioned there was a couple of topics he wanted to discuss, so I thought, no time like the present. So for those that perhaps not familiar with you, JJ, do you want to give everyone a little bit of a breakdown? And and we'll kick off. If there are any questions in the meantime, feel free to put them in the chat. We'll sort of stop at regular intervals to sort of go through any questions you've got. So yeah, just feel free to any opinions or questions or anything you'd like answered, just fire away.
Certainly. Okay. So my name's JJ Davey. I've been in technology now for approximately 10 years. 5 of those years have been in cybersecurity. I started my cybersecurity journey in 2018, where I was a junior SOC analyst, eventually progressing quite swiftly up the route to a tier 2 analyst. Done a bit of contract pen testing in my time. Recently promoted to a role of security operations lead here at Cyberclan, where I deal with everything from incident response, digital forensics, as well as various other different kind of facets of security. I also am a heavy advocate for mentoring and mentorship. And so I help run a company called Cyber Mentor Dojo, which is an application designed to help connect mentees with mentors and help people become a mentor as well. So you could say that I'm quite heavily involved with not just in cybersecurity, but within the community as well. So I help kind of nurture those kind of positive connections with people and help nurture a positive network within cybersecurity. So that kind of selfless commitment element is something that I'm a big passionate advocate for, and help people kind of become better in their roles and help them achieve what they want to in cybersecurity. But I think the whole purpose of this webinar today is to kind of discuss some hot topics, such as certifications, industry regulation. All these kind of topics are quite pertinent and they're quite relevant today in terms of how heated people get in terms of them. But there's a kind of a reality around them. So that's what we're going to go into today.
Yeah, you mentioned sort of Cyber Mentor Dojo, actually. I know that, and the mentoring stuff that you do. How has that gone since you had a sort of, did you have like it was a soft launch, was it? And then a sort of hard launch relatively recently?
Yeah, so we've done a soft launch that was around January last year. So the original idea was literally a Discord chat. So we had a Discord chat about this. We thought, right, this is actually a good idea. And then we soft launched it to see if there was any kind of legs in the idea. And then recently we actually relaunched the entire application, rebuilt from the ground up with lots of new features, the ability to do video calls, the ability to have this kind of nice looking interface that's kind of slick, and it gives you a more intuitive and user friendly experience. And it's just started to like blow up. It's just starting to launch, and the kind of feedback that we're getting at the moment is really good in terms of the positive impact that it's had with people's livelihoods, in terms of their ability to become a professional and get that guidance and that direction, which they didn't previously have. So it's good to kind of have that application that nurtures that relationship and nurtures that professional network from a kind of mentor and mentee perspective.
Sort of as a sidestep to that as well, there was a sort of initiative that we launched late last year called Cyber Launchpad, which was something to try and help people get their sort of first step on the ladder within information security, whether that's a graduate or junior role, maybe somebody that's trying to transition from IT into security, and equally to try and help managers to be introduced to these people. It's something that we do free of charge as well. I think it's beneficial to the whole industry that the more people we try and get into the industry to help then start moving up the ladder like yourself, is beneficial to everybody. People that are interested in that, I'll put my contact details at the end if anybody wants to hear any more information about that. But yeah, let's dive straight in then, JJ. What are the hot topics at the moment then that you wanted to discuss?
I think skills gap is quite a relevant one that we need to talk about. It's something that a lot of industry leaders have an opinion on, but a lot of people, they don't see the kind of reality of what's going on. They don't see the kind of the truth of the matter. And what I see is quite a lot of opinions that are only one side of the fence. And when we start looking at topics like this, we need to actually look at what's happening both sides of the fence, from the business perspective, from the hiring manager, from the talent that are trying to get in. And we can even go further to say the educational bodies that are training these candidates to go into the industry, is it really fulfilling all the requirements that these hiring managers need? Now, we could say, right, we can easily go, right, the hiring functions are broken. But when we look at reality of it, that's only a few companies that have broken hiring processes. There's many other companies out there that have really intuitive and really well thought out processes that help talent reach that seat, but they're not finding the right talent. And then we have the other argument that talent are not finding the right companies. It's like, where's a happy medium in that? We can point the finger of blame, but we need to think, there's a solution to these problems. So we could come up with maybe stuff like labs that could potentially interview for you. So you could say, right, we need to do a technical test. Let's give them a lab environment for an hour. They've got to go through a series of questions where they've got to actually do hands-on tasks, so we actually get their kind of ability. But then we also need to realize that professional ability. Companies don't have the ability to say, right, yeah, you've got no certifications, you've got no degree, we can hire you. They need to have some sort of assurance that the person that they're hiring is able to perform their role to the expected level. Mm-hmm. Now, that can't be said for entry-level roles, because they may have a lower parameter in terms of their hiring requirements. They may say, right, we can train you up all the way from 0 to hero. But then we've got to think, have the companies got the resources to do this? Have they got the ability to open up entry-level roles when they have their own roles and the responsibilities to fulfill? And if they're getting people to train these entry-level people, that's a cost to them. They're training these people at a cost. Now, a lot of businesses won't be able to make that cost, or won't be able to justify the requirement for that cost. So that's why we see entry-level roles are not as common as people think. Mm-hmm. And it's very difficult to kind of justify the requirement of entry-level roles for businesses that may be short on cash, or they might not have the kind of budget in security, because security isn't the only element of a business. You have finance. Yeah. Why don't we have entry-level roles in finance? Why don't we have entry-level roles in HR? At the same time, we've got to realize that this is a cost factor for the business. And for them to open this up and train you from 0 to hero, it's a cost to them. So that's why they're not common. So they need to be able to hire candidates that come with a certain credibility from a professional perspective, but also accreditations to say that, yes, they have reached this minimal baseline of benchmark, and we can hire them for it. So that's why we see that quite often on job descriptions.
It's about having that function in place as well, isn't it? Like you said, it's okay bringing a graduate in, but if then somebody has to take the time and just train them on the job, it's almost bringing them away from what they're doing. So you need to have the infrastructure in place to be able to take graduates on. I mean, in terms of what was your route into it? How did you go about it right at the very beginning?
So mine was kind of like a beg, borrow, and steal kind of approach. This recruiter phoned me up and said, like, we've got a security operations center role, but it's a graduate role. I was like, brilliant. I haven't got a degree, so I'm already on the back foot. So I thought, what is going to set me apart from the people that are also going for this role? And the only way that I could do that was emailing the company directly. So I emailed the company directly and I explained to them my story. I said, like, this is me. This is what I've been through. This is what I've done. This is what I've done in the military. And they threw me a bone. They said, right, we're going to get you in for an interview. So I got in for an interview, and it was a 3-stage interview. Initial one was a kind of meet and greet to kind of get a feel for what kind of person I am. The second one was a technical, and the third one was a kind of a professional interview. And that wasn't more personal. That was more, how would you approach a certain situation from a professional standpoint? So they gave me a problem, and they said, right, we need you to email the customer with a solution. So what they're looking at is how do you communicate to a customer who may not be a technical, and how do you kind of articulate the solution to that problem to a person that may not be technical. So I got through that 3-stage and I got the role. So for me, that was like, in a way that was quite lucky, but I managed to get that kind of role by stepping out of the normal kind of approach of you put your CV in and you wait. I put my CV in, phone a recruiter every day to show that I'm passionate, and I went ahead and emailed the company with a kind of story to why I might be a good fit for their business. Now, that doesn't work for every company. That doesn't work for every role. It's a kind of it's an approach that I like to take when your back's really against the wall and you need to kind of get your leg up on that wall as much as you can to climb over it. So you can say, like, right, if you're going to apply for a role, see if you can find out who the hiring manager may be. Connect with them on LinkedIn. Just say, hey, look, I know that my CV might be a bit bare, but this is what I could potentially bring to your organisation, and I'm willing to put the effort in. And you never know, they might be able to invest some resources in you to become that certified person and to become that more adequate professional in terms of the hiring kind of parameters.
It's interesting, just going back to something you mentioned earlier as well, with regards to sort of technical testing and things like that, which I think it's a great way to be able to showcase where you're at the moment, whether that's level 1, 2, 3, etc. I think there's something that does need to be sort of needs to be mindful of, is it, particularly if you take the industry at the moment, people are interviewing here, there, and everywhere. There's so many opportunities. If they have to do that for every organisation, I know that developers, for example, sometimes they won't do coding exams because it just takes up so much of their time, and more often than not, they're already in a job as well. It would be good to have a sort of platform there whereby they could do this themselves, which was almost industry standard, if that makes sense. Of course, there are capture the flag and hack the box and things like that you can do, but that only really caters for one side of the industry, doesn't it? I know that recently you've done your SISM exam, which is a departure from what you're doing at the moment. What was the thought process behind that, and do you think that's another area as well that could be looked at in terms of, how would you go about doing a technical test for a non-technical role?
Yeah, so for me, SISM was kind of a personal choice to go, right, okay, I'm very technical, but the problem that I'm solving isn't a technical problem, and I know it doesn't make sense, so I'm going to explain it a little bit. The reason why cybersecurity exists in the first place is because there's a potential risk to the business that involves technology. So we need to understand, well, what is risk? Why is it a risk to the business? Why is information security telling me that I need to go and secure this potential technology? So I thought, right, I need to start looking up there. I need to understand what their thought process is so I can add more context to what I'm doing. So if I understand information security and I understand the concept of risk and governance more, I understand why I'm doing a particular function or why I'm doing a particular process. So for me, it's like, well, if I can understand risk, I could then look at these systems at a more risk-based approach that's more kind of thought out from a logical perspective. And I'm not just going, right, it's a CVSS score of 10 or it's a critical CVE. I'm actually adding context. I'm understanding that this vulnerability may not be applicable to the organization, therefore it may not be a risk. So I'm seeing it from a different lens. I'm not seeing it from a fear-mongering lens. I'm seeing it from an actual kind of perspective that the business recognize. So when I speak to senior leaders and I speak to different managers, I can speak their language a bit more. So they may be talking about financial risk. They may be talking about stuff like that. And I can talk their language a little bit more.
Have you seen any benefit from that already? Or is this something that you might pursue even further with some other sort of non-technical certifications?
I've seen huge benefits in terms of being able to apply what I've learned in my current job is absolutely massive, because when people start to take you a bit more seriously, when you can speak a language that they can understand, because you're able to communicate with them a lot more effectively. If I'm throwing IP addresses and maybe hashes at people, they're not going to know unless I start adding more context and relating it to their business and to their business functions. Do they know that I'm speaking a lot more sense in terms of what they understand? Now, I'm starting to go learning stuff like ISO 27001. If I can start adding these different facets together and becoming that T-shaped professional, I'm becoming a lot more useful from a higher ability perspective. So I'm not just that kind of security operations. I'm that security operations that knows the business, that knows the different functions. I can speak to finance and talk figures. I can talk money. I can talk to HR and talk people and talk hiring and talk screening. I can talk to these different elements of the business and help them from a kind of security standpoint and say, look, I know security may have been bad in the past, and I know we have the element to improve, but let's build a relationship. I want to understand your problems. And if I understand more than IP addresses and hash values, I understand their problems a bit more, and I can add the security element on top of what they're doing. So it builds a better relationship if I understand it more.
Conversely, do you think perhaps non-technical staff doing technical certifications could work equally well?
Yeah, and I think we're starting to see that in terms of I'm starting to see recruiters going for different certifications like Security Plus, and then you ask them why, and it's the same kind of reason. They want to be able to add more context to what they're doing. Now, I think, if we can have like a minimal security, a cybersecurity certification that doesn't just touch on security from a business perspective, but also personal cybersecurity, then they start to learn that this stuff could potentially impact them at home. And when you start adding that home element, then they start taking it a little bit more seriously. So adding that kind of approach to, maybe say I'm a HR person and I want to learn more about technical security, and I have that kind of technical security that could relate to different facets of my life, that's going to become more appealing. But that also transfers that onto the business. Because if you're thinking, right, I'm going to look through my personal emails to see if any of them are quite dodgy, you're going to think, right, I'm going to start looking at my business emails to see if any of them are quite dodgy. So you get that kind of skill transference. And I think being able to look at things from a different context and different perspective is incredibly powerful for a professional.
Yeah, and I think it comes down to as well sometimes that it's the two different facets to an organization. The IT side and the security side are sometimes often looked at two totally different sides of a coin, when really they should be looked at together, and obviously the non-technical side of things as well. In terms of sort of early courses, you sort of touched on things like Security Plus there. I mean, are there any at the moment that you think are really good value for money? Because I know that there's a lot. I think a lot of the time the problem with people that are looking to get their foot on the ladder is there's so many choices that sometimes, I mean, you might see a graduate out of university has already gone for OSCP or something, which it just seems like there would have been a more organic way to go through it. Other certifications get knocked all the time for not being value for money at all. I mean, if you were to sort of give anyone some advice at the minute, where would you say this is sort of the route you need to be looking at?
I said that's really, it's kind of a really subjective answer in terms of, I would like them to go and research what they want to do first, understand the kind of requirements. So let's just say you want to become a SOC analyst. So that's something I'm quite familiar with in terms of the requirements and certifications that you may need to do.
Sure.
But you need to look at, okay, right, where are you in the world? Because your requirements are going to differ. What kind of money have you got in the bank to be able to facilitate this learning? Because that's going to limit or open up more doors in terms of what you can do from certifications and from courses. The Security Plus is a good primer for pretty much all security roles. It's going to introduce you to a little bit of information security, a bit of cyber security, so that technical aspect as well. And it's going to give you that kind of well-rounded, high-level kind of approach to it before you start going and deep diving into different elements and facets. If you're going to become a SOC analyst, you need to be able to make sure that you're strong in your foundations from a technical perspective. So stuff like Linux administration, Windows administration, network administration, being able to understand all these different elements and how they work is going to help you tremendously. Then adding that security element on top, how to secure Linux, how to secure Windows, how to secure a network, you're going to start becoming a bit more of a stronger SOC analyst. And when you start looking at alerts, because you have this knowledge, you're then able to add context to those alerts because you know X, Y, and Z about that system. So I always recommend people to start at the very bottom, if that's where they are. And that comes from knowing who you are and knowing what you currently do. So if you've gone, so let's just say that, you've been in IT for a couple of years and you've gone through university and you've done a cybersecurity degree, computing, technology quite well already at that point. So it may not be worth going back to A+. It may not be worth going all the way back there. So you may need to look at something that's more applicable to where you currently are, but also paying respect to the requirements of the industry. So there's no point going for a certification. That means absolutely nothing to organizations in your geographical location. Yeah. So you need to look at what a company's asking for, and does that relate to what you're currently doing? If it does, get that certification. It's going to increase your chances. If it doesn't, it's probably not worth putting your money in that certification, but looking at something else.
Yeah, and I think it's always worth talking to the organisation you're working with at the moment as well to see if they have budgets for self-development and things like that. A lot of the time that is the case, but people don't even realise it. There's some, I don't know if you've looked into it much, there's some changes coming to the CISP exam soon, isn't there? Is that something you've read about or?
Yeah, so I'm starting to look more into I'm looking into doing CISP at the moment. And it's quite interesting to see that all certifications are starting to change, and they're starting to kind of change with technology with the current landscape of cloud technologies. You started to see these certifications having more cloud elements in, and especially true for Security Plus. We're starting to see more cloud elements in there, and as well for Network Plus, we're starting to see more cloud elements come into there. And I think this is something that we need to be aware of when we take any certification, is that they're going to change with the landscape. And that's going to change with what you need to learn. So let's just say that you passed this 5 years ago. That's not going to mean that the domains are the same in 5 years' time. So it's interesting to see that a lot of these are starting to kind of change. And with that, we're starting to see the kind of the legal requirements of businesses change as well. So from an insurance perspective, but also from a regulatory perspective as well. So we're starting to see certifications have a lot more kind of impact from insurance and from regulatory compliance.
That was something that you mentioned. Is that something you wanted to discuss in depth with regards to potential changes with the legislation and stuff?
Yeah, so I think 2025 they're becoming a more regulatory kind of standards around kind of the workforce in cybersecurity. So there's going to be minimum standards. So think about physical security in the UK. You have your SIA. You get your SIA badge to say that you're able to perform work at a certain standard, and we're going to see that. And we're going to see that coming in cybersecurity. Now, there's pros and cons to that, and I think one of the pros is we're going to start to see some standardization in terms of the different roles in cybersecurity and the requirements that those roles may have. One of the cons of that is we're going to start cornering the market. There's going to be certifications that are kind of dropped off because they no longer mean anything in terms of legal requirements. So, for example, if you want to get DoD requirements, there's only certain certifications in the US that get you that requirement, and now we're going to see that in the UK. That can have a negative effect, and I think from a thought perspective, it's also going to limit people's thought, because they're only going to be thinking about passing the relevant certifications that give them that certain standard, as opposed to wanting to develop themselves outside of that standard. Because I think once we start to kind of parameterize ourselves, we're then stuck within those parameters, and we start to be herded into that kind of thought process. So there's going to be pros and cons to it. So there's going to be that standardization from ethics and from professional standards, but there's also going to be that kind of parameterization and that kind of those boundaries pushed on people. So people might not be like, right, for me to get this particular standard, I need to get Security Plus, I need to get this, or whatever it may be, to achieve that, and it's going to cost me this much amount of money. I now suddenly don't want to become a data protection expert or whatever it may be, because it's not going to get me that standard. Now, they haven't fully published what it's going to look like yet, so that could be open to interpretation. But I think once we start to kind of limit people's abilities, other elements of security is probably going to get forgotten about because it's not mentioned in the standard. So we need to be very careful when we enter this kind of territory that we're doing it properly and we're taking a nice low and slow approach. Because if we start saying, right, that's now in place, you can't work in security unless you have this particular standard, then that's going to be very damaging. Because imagine people leaving university, they've paid all of this money and they have all of this debt and they've got this degree, that now they need to go and chase these certifications that may cost them money that they haven't got to get this particular standard, to be able to work in their field of study. So it's like, where do we draw that happy medium? Is a degree going to get that standard? Or is it going to be separate from a degree that you need to get the standard separately? Because having a degree in physical security doesn't mean you have an SIA license. You've got to go do that separately. So it's like, how is it going to look? And it's interesting to see the development. And it's also interesting to see people's opinions on it.
I think as well, one of the things that people need to be mindful of there, reliance on the certifications, is that there's people, really talented people, that perhaps just don't perform well in an exam environment. You look at people that may have 10, 15, 20 years experience, and, they're much more talented than someone that they can just sit an exam, that they're just really good at soaking up information and being really book smart. That's not the be all and end all. And I think that's quite a dangerous precedent to set, in that this company, X company, needs to hire staff with Y certification, and you're just going to rule out a whole range of people that could be perfect for the role, just because they either don't have the funds, like you said, or they're just not very good in an exam environment. And that is an issue that I think is potentially going to occur.
Yeah, I mean, I found, from my perspective, I've done CISM in 4 weeks. I found it pretty easy as an exam. But that's not to say that I would make a good information security manager. That's not to say that I can deliver at that standard. That's just to say that I've got knowledge in that particular area of study. And that's not to say that CISM is gospel. That's not to say that the content is gospel. So for me, it's like, well, how do we make sure that these standards are related to the real world? Because a lot of certifications are in their own kind of bubble of everything is happy and everything is fantastic. But when you look at the real world, a lot of these certifications don't apply, like for like. It's like you've got to take little bits of it with a pinch of salt and then apply it to the real world. So somebody that has all these certifications is absolutely fantastic. But it's like when we start to standardize it, we need to make sure that it's applying to the real world and not a body of knowledge, making sure that it's actually applicable to what's actually happening in the environment.
I liken it to when I passed my driving test, and then the driving instructor turned around to me and said, "Now you'll learn how to drive." So it's you've got your license, you can physically move a vehicle, but actually driving it in the real world is when you're actually going to learn how to drive properly. So outside of that, I know that there was a couple of other areas that you wanted to touch on. I mean, there was problems with the hiring process. I don't know if that was just to do with the graduate side of things, or if there was another area of it that you wanted to touch on.
Yeah, so there's two sides of the coin here. There's the hiring function and there's the candidate. And I think we're both to blame here. And that's controversial for me to say that, but I think we're both to blame. I think businesses need to have better hiring functions. And I think candidates need to make sure that they need to understand that not everything is handed to them on a plate. There needs to be some kind of oomph behind them to be able to get that role, to be able to sell themselves as that perfect candidate to the organization. We're seeing roles that have 200-300 people apply for it. It's like, well, okay, there are 200-300 people that could be better than you or at the same level. So you need to be able to stand up from the crowd. And it's all good and well applying for 100-200 jobs. But when the odds are stacked against you, you need to be able to improve your chances statistically by standing out from that crowd. Otherwise, you're just a piece of paper in an ATS system or a piece of paper on a desk. How do we break away from that? And it's all about building that personal brand. So if you can build that personal brand, show your passion, demonstrate your skills, be able to get your message across to the hiring managers, you're going to have a lot better chance. They're going to know your name. Imagine if somebody picks up your CV and they look at the name and like, oh, actually, I recognize that name. I think I might have seen them on LinkedIn. They go ahead and they type in your name on LinkedIn and they start seeing all these really wonderful, well-written articles and posts and videos. All of a sudden, you've made yourself a much more kind of lucrative candidate as opposed to a lockdown profile with just a CV, because they probably have thousands of them. And a lot of organizations are starting to become very people focused. So they want that cultural fit more than anything. So if you have the skills, but you're a very bad person, you're not going to get a role. It's as simple as that. But if you're a good person and you're a good cultural fit for some organizations, they're more likely going to hire you. So we need to start drawing the line about who we point the finger of blame at, because we're both to blame. I've seen organizations that I've worked for that have had less favorable hiring practices. But then again, I've seen candidates apply for those jobs that just don't have the effort, incomplete CVs that have really bad formatting or lots of spelling mistakes. That just demonstrates that you're not passionate and you don't have that kind of that willingness to be able to come across the best possible way. It's that old expression that first impressions matter, and they do. It's a very superficial process, hiring. They're going to look for the person and they're going to look for what you can bring. They're not going to look for, your backstory or anything like that. They don't care about that. They don't care about you as a person. You're a product to them, and they're going to be putting money into this product and they want to be able to see the benefits. And if you can't show them the benefits, they're probably not going to hire you.
Yeah, no, solid advice. I think having that awareness to get involved, whether it's communities online, there's things like Discord and stuff like that, which seems to have taken. I think you're quite heavily involved with that as well, aren't you? What is it you're doing over there? Is that the Cyber Mentor Dojo side of things?
Yeah, so I'm part of many different servers in cybersecurity. So we have all these little what we call servers, which are essentially communities where people come together and they discuss different topics that they might enjoy or different topics that they have in common. So Cyber Mentor Dojo have the Discord channel, and that's more for mentors and mentees, just to have a general kind of off-topic chat. Or we have Cyber Job Hunting, which is more for job seekers and people that are interested in different projects around cybersecurity. And then there's thousands of other different communities for absolutely everything. I'm seeing GRC communities pop up, which is really good because GRC doesn't get enough love, in my opinion. So we're starting to see that, and we're starting to see organizations taking Discord a bit more seriously. Whereas before it was a very laddish kind of gaming community, now it starts to break out into all these different elements, and it's good to see, because it allows people to kind of connect with the industry at a much more personal level.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, as you mentioned, sort of GRC, there's been a lot of talk recently about. I think something that is apparent within the industry is that you do tend to find that sort of graduates, they will gravitate towards the SOC roles, the pen test roles, things like that, and it's trying to show that there is a wider spectrum of roles out there. You might not have an interest in networks and network security, or working in a SOC and stuff like that. Things like working within GRC, anything around there, working within auditory side of things, that there is an abundance of roles out there. So I think that if there are these communities within Discord that are able to show people that, and then ultimately help guide them through the process of getting within the industry, that's only going to be a positive thing.
Yeah, and it's something very important that people need to remember, is that security is just a subset of risk.
Yeah.
So without the element of risk and the calculation of risk and the analysis of risk and the management of it, there's no requirement for information security. No requirement for information security, there's no cybersecurity. So realizing that security is part of a much bigger picture than just technical, you're going to start opening your doors to potentially different roles that you may enjoy. I mean, I know a lot of people that love GRC, that absolutely, they're advocates for it. And again, it's subjective to the learner if they enjoy that kind of element where they're becoming more theory-based, more hands-on, more policy and process-driven, as opposed to more you're all part of a bigger picture. There's no role out there that's more important than another, because you all have a part to play.
Yeah, it's all parts of the same wheel. That's been a pretty good half an hour, that is, JJ. Was there anything else you wanted to cover before? If there are any questions from other people that missed me mention at the start, feel free to pop them in the chat box. We can go through them, no problem. But was there any other areas you wanted to touch on?
No, I think we've covered it quite well. I think we're starting to get a few questions in. I am open to questions, so please go ahead and drop them in the chat.
Yeah, there's one here from Way. Hi, Way. Good to see you. Do you feel the cyber industry speed in promoting and encouraging more women from diverse backgrounds is enough? Cyber is a heavy male-dominated industry from personal experience.
That's right. It is a very heavy male-dominated industry, and it's very apparent to see that. I do think that not just the industries, but companies themselves that hire cybersecurity professionals are starting to make start to have a stronger stance on this, on hiring not just from women, but diverse talent altogether. So they're starting to open the doors more, and I think this is it's a generation arms about everything. As opposed to before, it was very locked down, it's very regimental, it's very suit and tie. And I think a lot of organizations are moving quite fast in terms of how they're changing their ways of operating and how they're changing their approach to hiring talent in terms of that diversity aspect. But there's lots of organizations out there that are not doing it at a kind of fast enough rate. A lot of it, for me, from a personal opinion, is virtual signaling. And a lot of organizations, they do need to put their money where their mouth is when they start about hiring talent, because if you start hiring people that are very much one-on-one the same, you're going to get this kind of lockdown of thought, when a lot of companies need to be able to benefit from diversity of thought, because we all see things from different angles, and those different angles could potentially become that solution to a very complex problem.
I think, funnily enough, one of my old colleagues was big on promoting sort of diversity within recruitment, and I think neurodiversity is another area that a lot of organisations need to focus on and be aware of. That's obviously a big thing at the moment, but it seems to be something that it's just falling behind at the moment. But yeah, neurodiversity is another thing I'm a big advocate of. A question for Hakeem. I've got a question for Jay. In terms of certification, how would you compare a solution-based certification to a security certification, e.g. Splunk compared to CISA Plus, in terms of getting further into the industry?
So I actually had a very good discussion about this, about vendor agnostic certifications versus vendor only certifications. So for example, we talked about Network Plus versus CCNA, where CCNA is very Cisco-driven, Network Plus is CompTIA, is very broad, it's very open. Now, for me, it's all about learning the concepts and constructs underneath the certification. So when you're learning something like Splunk, you're learning what is a SIM tool, how to use a SIM tool to visualize data, how to use a SIM tool to hunt for threats. So applying that to different elements in terms of different SIM tools is going to be very handy. Now that comes down from the learner's personal ability to be able to learn the constructs and concepts and apply them to different areas. So if you're learning Cisco only, you can start to apply that to different elements of networking, different equipment. So for me, it would be like, well, we first need to understand where do you want to go. If you want to become a SOC analyst, then both of those certifications are going to be very, very useful in understanding the kind of hunting for threats and learning about what threats are. But the Splunk element is going to help you learn that how to visualize threats using that tool. But if you can understand the concepts and constructs and apply it to different tools in different areas. So for me, I know Splunk quite well. Therefore, I'm going to be able to know how to use different SIM tools quite well. I just need to learn their syntax. I need to learn their graphical user interface. So it's all about applying those different kind of concepts to different tools.
Perfect. There was another really interesting question here, actually, something that I was meant to mention earlier. Question for you, Jay, from James. Thanks, James. You mention and talk a lot about you learning how other areas of the business work, HR, finance, etc., so that you can work better with them or add value. What do you think other areas of the business should be doing to better understand what we do in security?
Talking, communication. I think that's really important. I think having an open door policy with different elements of the business is very important to understand what each other is doing, not just from a security perspective, but I feel that a lot of functions in the business become very siloed. So I think having that kind of steering committee, that open line of communication, maybe having like group sessions where heads of different department, they come together, they talk about their problems and their pain points, and they help give each other solutions. I think that opens that kind of door for discussion. Having kind of work events where it's not just security going out for a party, it's not just HR going out for a party, but it's the business are going for that kind of party, and they get there, they discuss what they do, and they have fun. I think that kind of has that kind of collaboration element to it. The problem is a lot of organizations, they treat functions as silos. And when you do that, you remove that element of communication, and then they have no visibility of what you do. For example, a phishing email comes in, I'll guarantee you, if you ask anyone at some business, they might not even know that security team exists that they can report it to, because they haven't got that line of communication. And if they have that line of communication, then they know where to report it to. They know, hey, Jay works in security. I might ask him. You know, that looks a bit dodgy. I might ask him if it's okay. And that adds that kind of element of that security culture that people bang on about. Is that culture is driven by having that open line of communication and understanding each other. Otherwise, it's just like, oh, security. No, don't worry about them. They are just they're no guys. We don't want to. They're just going to say no to everything. And I think once you start going down that element, that's when communication is like, we don't want to talk to them, so we don't understand what they do. But when they realise actually security can help me work better because they have a safer option for me able to perform my role that's already available, then it's the business has already impacted itself because it doesn't want to talk to the security, but then security have already impacted the business because they want to say no to the business. So I think communication is absolutely important from all aspects to understand what each other does.
Yeah, so many times you hear the conversation where security is not being treated as an enabler for the business. It's almost like they're still the naughty kid in the corner at times that just wants more and more money. But as they say,
I think we need to be very careful about calling security enabler. It's one of my pet hates is that security doesn't enable anything. You can pack up security, go home, and the business will still be trading. Security just helps the business operate safely. But I think if you remove that communication, then the business can't operate safely because they don't want to engage with them. But at the same time, our security needs to learn to engage how to engage with the business.
Nice. Yeah. Fair enough. I agree. Any more questions from anybody else before we let Jay go and get some dinner or lunch? What part of the country you're in? Give it a couple of minutes. Appreciate that. Thanks, JJ. It was covered a lot of ground there in 30-40 minutes.
Yeah, it was a good chat.
We should do it again. We'll wait till Christmas time so you can get the Christmas board.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we'll if there's no more questions, we'll wrap it up there. But yeah, as I said, contact details there for myself if you want to get in touch with regards to Cyber Launchpad. Of course, JJ will be available to if anyone wants mentoring or wants to learn more about Cyber Mentor Dojo as well. Thanks a lot for coming. Keep an eye out for the next ones. As I say, this is the first of many, and long term we'll look to make them into physical meetups. But the benefit of doing these online is that you can be anywhere in, not just in the country, but anywhere in the world. So appreciate that, guys. Thanks a lot, and we will see you soon. Thanks again, JJ.
Brilliant. Thank you. Take care. Thank you for having me on.